I think Owen has really left us with not a lot to talk about because he's covered so much in his speech. I first met Owen when I first got elected as an MP in 2005, and Owen, I don't know if we talk about this very much, but you're working in the House of Commons for the trade unions, and so Owen was always a friendly face, always someone that was there to give support, to give advice if it was needed in terms of information and research, but also in those first few months when we were being faced with all sorts of challenges by the Labour leadership as they tried to pass all sorts of different types of legislation through, whether it was ID cards, whether it was 90 days detention. Owen was always there giving a huge amount of support, so I'm absolutely delighted to see that he is doing so well, both in the media but also in the political arena, as he goes round the country and makes our case to people perhaps who would not hear from a Labour person otherwise. I think we need to be absolutely clear that the big issue that Labour has to get its act together on is the economy. What the media are saying already is that the next general election is going to be the cost of living election. And I think that's a good thing, because that's what Ed Miliband has been saying over the last period of time. And if you look at what Labour's talking about in Parliament, that's the agenda that we're pursuing. If you look at the votes that we had this week on the energy freeze, on the energy price issue, on the behaviour of the energy companies, and whether they are under any form of control, it's quite clear that Labour has the support of the British people. If you look at the vote that's going to take place on Tuesday of next week on the bedroom tax, when Labour is going to put forward a motion calling for the bedroom tax to be abolished, it's absolutely clear that Labour has the support of ordinary working people up and down this country. The reality, however, is that we are not going to be able to effectively address that cost of living crisis unless we challenge austerity. Because when you look down around Europe, what's happening in Britain is far from unique. The politics and the ideologues that are putting forward these politics of austerity, this politics of public spending cuts, of rolling back the state, of taking away from the poorest in society, are arguing the same thing in country after country. And of course, these are not new ideas. They're ideas that people in this room will be only too familiar with. As decade after decade, we've heard these arguments put forward by the right as to why it's necessary to have a trickle-down economy, why it's necessary to give freedom to those that run the economy, why it's unreasonable to put any restrictions on their ability to exploit the weaknesses of others to make profits. We've lived through 30 years when in many ways the left has been on retreat. And in some ways, the political centre has moved to the right. In other ways, it hasn't. On many social issues, we've seen huge advances. If you look at the position of women, the fact we've actually got some more women in Parliament is something that has really been impossible for the political establishment to stop. The fact that we've seen such massive improvements in terms of women's ability to live independently, to have economic independence and to have more choice. The fact that we've seen huge strides in terms of the gay rights issue and many of the other equality issues are not in any way to be derided. They are massive advances and in no way could be considered other than moves towards a more progressive and more left-wing society. But on many of the economic issues, what we've seen is privatisation after privatisation. The unions, and I'm delighted that Steve's here today, the unions on the retreat, as we've seen union membership, which in this country has always been historically so important, going down particularly in the private sector where we need industrial strength. In many ways, the left have not won the arguments, and that the politics of Thatcher have been hugely successful, not just in our own party, but in ours also. And therefore, this politics of austerity and this issue of austerity has got to be absolutely central to what we talk about over the coming period of time. I was delighted to see yesterday that it looks like the government may not appeal the Independent Living Fund decision that was taken by the courts this week. This is an issue, John McDonnell's here with us today, and this is an issue that John's been very involved with over a long period of time. I've been involved with some of the disability groups. And this was the decision that the government took, that it wanted to abolish the Independent Living Fund, which is the national fund that helps about 20,000 people with the most severe disabilities in this country from living, to help them live independently. And the fact that the court has overturned that decision, and it looks like perhaps the government might not fight that decision, I think it's a huge victory to all those that have campaigned in the disability movement against the abolition of that fund. But the reality is, disabled people have been absolutely at the forefront of the attacks that have been taking place. The young, the disabled, the poor are the people that are paying the price of austerity and the government's policy. If you look at an area like North Ayrshire that I represent, literally millions of pounds have been taken out of the economy by the benefit cuts. We've heard a lot this week about sanctions, and I know as a constituency MP that increasingly we're getting more and more constituents come through the door who are being sanctioned for 13 weeks, for longer periods of time, who are being told that they're not going to get any benefits till Christmas because they've not behaved in exactly the way that the job centre wanted, and perhaps haven't applied for quite as many jobs as they thought they should this week. And this week we have the figures to prove it. If you look at the job centres in my constituency, in Sawcliff's job centre, in October 2012 there were 60 sanctions. In May of this year it was 170. In June it was 160. In Kilbirnie, another job centre in my constituency, it was 10 sanctions. In October 2012, but in April, May and June this year it was 60 every month. And that'll be the case in John McDonnell's constituency, that'll be the case in every constituency that you live in. The reality is there's probably targets, because it's very difficult to look at those figures and to see the consistency in those figures to believe that this is about individual cases and it isn't about targets that staff are under. But the reality is this is yet another way that the poor are being victimised and money is being taken out of their economy. So I honestly believe that if we're going to effectively change the cost of living debate in this country, if we're going to effectively turn round the huge move there has been to take from the poor and give to the rich, if we are to stop the huge transfers that we are seeing from the poorest in this country to the richest in this country, we have to take this austerity issue on. John McDonnell's here. I think there was 4 of us that voted against the Fiscal Responsibility Bill in the last government. If we get back into power, which we will in 2015 or before, we need to get this right, because we need a Labour government that will deliver. And to do that, we need to take on the politics of austerity. We need to say that if you take money out of economies, if you grind down the living standards of ordinary working people, there will be no economic recovery, and the people of this country will not have a full and proper share of this wealth. So I wish all those that have been involved in putting this campaign together, Ben, Kat, all those in Next Generation Labour, all the organisations that are supporting this initiative, I wish you the best in working with all of us to make sure that we put this type of politics on the agenda over the next 18 months as we move to the next Labour general election, when I believe we will see a majority Labour government.